gas-fueled fires and collapsed buildings and a failed water system, all combining to create this holocaust of death and destruction throughout the 5 boroughs of New York. I don't want to be an alarmist here, but from what I've learned, those are the genuine dangers of a serious earthquake.
All along New York's steel and brick canyons, the disaster plays out in 1,000 terrifying ways. From the very public scenes of epic terror to the private dramas. On the Upper East Side, the shaking jars the residents of a 20-story apartment building. The violent sloshing of water inside the rooftop water tower sends the tank crashing to the street. Every structure in the city responds to the earthquake in its own way, depending on how it's built. Author and journalist Stephen S. Ross is an expert on New York's buildings and infrastructure. A physicist by training, he's one of the world's leading authorities on why structures fail. Looking at Manhattan from across the East River, Ross sees a vision of disaster.
When I look out towards Manhattan, I actually see a lot of problems. Take a look at this low, unreinforced rock wall. That could collapse in a major earthquake, blocking the highway here. Notice the buildings built on platforms out over the drive itself. If the earthquake hit just right, it could collapse the platform that building sits on. During an earthquake, I would not want to be on the Roosevelt Island tram.
For more than 30 years, the Roosevelt Island Tramway has been performing its 3,000-foot-long high wire act across the East River, ferrying commuters between Queens, Roosevelt Island, and Manhattan. Dangling 250 feet above the water, each car can pack in up to 125 people. In the best-case scenario, you would be in for a scary thrill ride. In the worst case,
if the big one hit when the tram was right on top of a pylon, the pylon could collapse. And if the pylon toppled, that would be almost certain death for people inside the tram. The pylon itself is fairly light. Think of it as a lollipop stick. If I wave the stick back and forth after I've eaten a lollipop, I can do that forever, right? But if there's a nice heavy lollipop on top of that stick, if I whip the stick too much, the stick may break. Well, the tram car is basically the lollipop, and the pylon is basically the stick. If it shakes too much, everything collapses.
just beyond the tramway is the 59th Street Bridge. Of all the city's 21 major bridges, this one is most likely to collapse in an earthquake.
You look at the bridge, it looks fairly solid. It has this web of steel around it. However, the steel is almost entirely vertical. You can see that you don't have a lot of bracing against those verticals. When you get an earthquake, the wave of energy moves the beams this way. If there were actually an earthquake at Richter 6 or Richter 7, which is really about the maximum credible earthquake we think of around here, the bridge would collapse.
Ultimately, all of this devastation is dealt by the seismic waves radiating out from the epicenter of the earthquake. Scientists have a good idea how these waves work.
The best way to understand earthquake waves is like throwing a rock in a pond. There's a radial motion of the waves as they come out of that epicenter and move away from it in all directions.